it's very, for me, it's very important that we're not going to learn in a disassociated way. In other words, I certainly want to try to keep in my mind that around us, close to us, far from us, there are people in distress. There are people who are fighting, but also there's a lot of strength and emunah, and hopefully we will all going to see Yad Hashem with Yeshua Shlema. And before we'll start the learning, I mean the topic, what was supposed to be our normal yearly course, I do want to read one Perek Tehillim. I've been reading Tehillim, and I just randomly got this Perek, and it was shocking to me how relevant that Perek is, and it happens with many Perkei Tehillim, but I do want to share that that specific Perek and read it לרפואת הפצועים בנפש ובגוף, להחזרת החטופים, להצלחת החיילים, לנחמה למשפחות של הנופלים. It's Tehillim Perek Kuf Mem. Whoever of you has, but if not, I have it here. I put the English so everyone can understand. למנצח מזמור לדוד. חלצני אדוני מאדם רע, מאיש חמסים תנצרני. אשר חשבו רעות בלב, כל יום יגורו מלחמות. שננו לשונם כמו נחש, חמת אחשוב תחת שפתמו. שומרני אדוני מידי רשע, מאיש חמסים תנצרני, אשר חשבו לדחות פעמי. תמנו גאים פח לי, וחבלים פרסו רשת ליד מעגל. מוקשים שטו לי סלע. אמרתי לאדוני אלי אתה, האזינה אדוני כל תחנוני. אדוני אלוהים עוז ישועתי, סקות לראשי ביום נשק. אל תיתן אדוני מאוויי רשע, זממו אל תפק ירומו סלע. ראש מסיבי עמל שפתמו, יחסמו. ימותו עליהם גחלים, באש יפילם, במהמורות בל יקומו. איש לשון בל ייכון בארץ, איש חמס רע יצודנו למדחפות. ידעתי כי יעשה אדוני דין עני משפט אביונים. אך צדיקים יודו לשמך, ישבו ישרים את פניך. Since this is a very intimate group, I do want to share that it's really difficult for me to teach, but we will do that. We will do it. הנושא, the topic that we chose for this year is Midrash, but not Midrash, specifically biblical figures in the eyes of the Midrash. And so it's not really learning Tanakh or the biblical text. It's actually learning Chazal. It's learning how Chazal used figures in the Bible to convey their ethic readings, their educational understanding, their theological understanding in the world. And through the reading of Tanakh, they're actually giving us their way of thinking in a very deep reading of the text. So sometimes it's going to be pshat. In other words, something is not, something is very unclear in the text. So they will explain it through Midrash. But sometimes it's going to, there's nothing wrong with the text, but they have something very urgent to say, and they're using the text in order to say those things. So we will meet different characters, different figures. I chose less known people. I mean, we do know them, we do know of them, but not necessarily know what Chazal had to add to those figures. But because what we're doing is learning Midrash, we have to have some introduction to Midrash. And it's in a very specific way, because what I found when I started giving this course, I don't know, about 20 years ago, for some of the students, it was really hard. The question people ask themselves, is Midrash true? Chazal are telling us something true that happened, but it's just not written in the Tanakh? Or if it's not true, why are they saying it? And do we have to believe every word that is written in the Midrash? And these are very, very, very good questions. And in order to start reading Midrashim, we have to have an understanding. I even call it a religious understanding, a theological understanding, a philosophical understanding of how to approach Midrash. So for that, I've sent you the words of the Rambam. We'll be reading those, and then I'll add a few other opinions before we go into our first text. So I'll share the Rambam and a few other things that I added that you don't have, but I felt that they're also going to give us a deep understanding approaching Midrashim. So this is the Rambam in Perush LaMishnah of Sanhedrin. And Perush LaMishnah of the Rambam was written when he was younger. Some say between the age of 21 to 27, because he started writing Mishneh Torah, the Yad HaChazakah, at the age of 27. It took him 10 years to write that. And in the Perush of the Mishnah, he's laying for the first time, before he'll do it when he'll be 51 in the Guide for the Perplexed, he's laying his philosophical and theological understanding of Jewish religion and Jewish thought, and also the way that the Chazal approach Torah. And here he's talking in regard of Midrashei Chazal, and he's asking, people understand the words of Chazal in 3 different ways. And he says, and you should know that regarding the words of Chazal, and especially he's talking about Midrashim, there are 3 different groups, okay? There are 3 different groups in the way that people approach Midrashei Chazal. The first one, and you have the English, as usual, I'm going to read the Hebrew, but you have the English if you printed down the pages. The first group says the Rambam, Vehu Rov, in other words, most people belong to the first group. And these people that I saw what they write, I heard what they believe, הם מבינים על הפשט, ואין סוברים בהם פירוש נסתר בשום פנים, ואומנם כן, לפי שלא הבינו החוכמה והם רחוקים מן התבונות. In other words, this first group, there are people, and that's most of the people, that they believe that every word that Chazal say in the Midrash, it's pshat. In other words, they don't try to understand the words of Chazal in an allegorical way or philosophical way, or as a parable or as a symbol. They understand the words of Chazal as they are, as pshat. And even if some of the things that Chazal say are just far from being rational or making any sense, because this is what Chazal told us in the Midrash or in the Gemara, those people take it to be true. And they just think, we cannot understand what Chazal are saying because Chazal are very wise and they respect Chazal. And that's why they take their own sechel, their own understanding, even though it doesn't make sense, and they put it down and they say, okay, this is something we don't understand because we are simple people and Chazal knew what they were saying, and we take what they say as is. And what the Rambam is saying about this specific group, he says, Hakat hazeh me'abdim hadrat Torah uma'apilim zohara umesimim Torat Hashem behefech hamechuvan ba. This group, they think they respect Chazal, but really what they do, they take the glory of the Torah and they take the wonder of the Torah and they put it in darkness. They take Torat Hashem and they do the opposite of what they think they do. They think they give a lot of respect and awe to the Torah because Chazal are saying these specific things, but really what they're doing is the opposite. They are disgracing Torah through understanding that the words of Chazal are literate. And Rambam is saying, look, God himself says that he's giving the Torah to Am Chacham Venavon. He's giving the Torah to a wise and smart nation. And because he also gave us our mind, our sechel, our brain, we should never think that if we see something which is against logic, against rationalism, against reality, we shouldn't take it as such. And there's something hidden in these words. And if we want to respect Chazal for being wise, we need to make an effort to try to understand what's behind the words of Chazal. And if it contradicts our mind, our sechel that God gave us, okay, rational or philosophical understanding or religious understanding, we need to understand that it's not pshat, but there's something deep hidden in the words of Chazal that we need to understand. And if we think that Chazal, the wise that they were, are saying something that doesn't make sense, and that's pshat, it's not only that we don't have that we do the opposite of what the Torah meant, but we also showing in that approach that Chazal are really not that smart. In other words, it's putting down the Torah and Chazal if we think this is really what Chazal said. So the Rambam says, for most of the people, let me just conclude that section. For most of the people who are God-fearing people, who have a lot of respect for Chazal, believe that Chazal were the smartest people on earth, to think that they meant midrashim that don't make sense is missing out on the original and the deep intent of Chachamim. Okay, so that's one group. Our job, if we belong to that group, is to understand or try to reveal the deep meaning of the midrashim that Chazal said. So that's the first group, and that's the majority of people. The second group, there are also a lot of them, says the Rambam, Rabim Gam Ken, והם אותם שראו דברי החכמים ושמעו והבינו אותם כפשוטו, וחשבו שלא כיוונו החכמים בו זולת מה שמורה עליו הפשט, והם באים לסכל אותם ולגנותם ומוציאים דיבה על מה שאין דיבה וילעגו על דברי חכמים. The second group are the people that, and also a lot of them, that think that Chazal believed in every word they said, and for them, this is a proof that Chazal were little people, not so smart people, and they disgrace the words of Chazal to say, look, you think your sages were so smart? If they said something like this, that's a proof that they're not smart. That's the proof that they are little people, not so smart people, And on them, says the Rambam, these people are worse than the first group, because the first group is respecting Chazal and believe in God and believe in the words of Hashem and believe that Chazal are trying to give us a deep understanding. But they're common people that think that if this is what Chazal said, so that's the truth. The second group are people that taking the literal words of Chazal in Midrashim that don't make sense, and for them that's the proof that the sages are not so smart people. Not that they are. If they said something like, if they said things that don't make sense, that means that our entire religion, our entire belief is not a true belief, and that's why they are worse and they're cursed, because they're taking great people as our sages and they're making them stupid, forgive my language, and it's the Rambam, and they're making them stupid people, and that's why they distance themselves from the words of Chazal. Okay, so the second group, they're not only putting down Chazal, but the cause of what they do is distancing people from Torah, because people that believe the second group are saying, okay, if this is what the Jewish sages are saying, I'm a smart philosophical student in Spain, and therefore I don't want anything to do with Chachamim, with the Gemara, with the Midrash, and at the end with Torah. So that's the second group. So if you just before I read the third group, because it's in order to understand the punch of the third group, we have to remember that the Rambam said that the second group is most of the people, and the second group are also a lot of people. And when we reach the third group, the Rambam is saying the following: V'akat shlishit vehem chei Hashem me'atim ad meod. Says the third group, God help me, there are few, very, very few people. Ad she'en re'uyim likrotam kad. I can't even call them a group because there's so little people, just very few people. I can't even a group, as you cannot call the sun a group, because the sun is the only one. So how few are these people? They're few as there's one sun in the sky. And I don't know, like, I don't want to read into the words of the Rambam, words that he didn't think, but if you're talking about a group of people that there are so few as there's one sun in the group, I don't know when humanity realized that there are few suns, okay, in the atmosphere, but the Rambam is saying maybe one, maybe two. Who are those people that are so few? Obviously, the Rambam includes himself in that third group. Okay, so I don't know if he thinks he's the only one to understand the words of Chazal, but he's definitely telling us that he can count on one hand the number of people that belong to the third group. And let me just repeat what Jordana just said. If you have questions, either write them down, okay, or just interrupt my words. But and then I hope I'll be able to answer. Okay, so that's the third group. It's very few. 1, 2, 3, 4. Very, very few. What do they believe? What do they understand? These are people who definitely understand the greatness of Chazal and has a lot of respect for what they say. But they're also people that cannot contradict their sechel. Okay, that's why I mentioned the guide for the perplexed, because in 10 years the Rambam will understand that we must write a book for those people who are fully believers and learn Torah, and fully smart and learn philosophy and logic, and there's some things that contradict, and that's why he's writing the guide for the perplexed. Here he's saying the third group who has the truth about the words of Chazal in the Midrash are those who, of course, respect Chazal and know they are great. Etzlam Gdulat Chazal, berura, that it's obvious to them. And when they find things that are contradicting their mind or their sechel or their logic, they understand that Chazal are saying something which is hidden. Chazal are saying something in a metaphorical way, in an allegorical way, in a symbolic way. There's a message there. They don't mean it literally. And when you put your mind into understanding the message of Chazal, then you will understand the words of Chazal, and you both keep your sechel, that God gave you, and your understanding, and both the respect for Chazal. And then the Rambam says, and if you believe that you belong to the third cult, the third group, when you see things of what Chazal are saying that are far from understanding logically, look at it, check it, try to understand it. It's a riddle, it's a parable, okay? Take your time to put the effort into the words and try to understand the truth that Chazal put into the Midrash, and then you'll be able to understand the Midrash, and then the Midrash have more of faith in Torah. Now, these are very philosophical ways, but I think it gives us a very straight understanding of the right approach towards Chazal. Just to give you a historical context, because we're so used to reading Midrash and not think twice, maybe, does it make sense or not? The Midrash, the main Midrashim of Bereshit Rabbah, let me just move this. Okay, I you know what? Let me just close I'll share it later. So we have your words. Yes.
Can I ask you a question?
Ken betach.
Okay. I wasn't sure if you heard me. I'm sorry. I hope this is not like so general, basic, and I might be embarrassing myself. Like,
go ahead.
Who are Chazal? Who is this? Who's the Chazal?
That's a great question. That's a great question, Rachel. Okay. Toda shesha'at. Mamash, it's a great question. Chazal are about 600 years of in Israel, in the land of Israel, writing midrashim. So the first midrashim we have are about 100 years BCE, okay? And the major group of midrashim are from the time of the Tanaim in Eretz Israel, 200 years in the time of the Mishnah. These midrashim are mostly midrashe halacha. Okay, I mean, I will give you. I have a list of a chronological dates for the midrashim. We'll do it in a mesudar way, but because you asked, I'll say it briefly. So we have midrashe Tanaim in Eretz Israel that they are mostly midrashe halacha. In other words, it's chachamim learning halacha through Torah. And during the time of the Amoraim, for 300 years in Eretz Israel, and some in Bavel, but mostly in Eretz Israel, these are Midrashe Rabbah, that we know, the Chamesh Megillot and Chamisha Chumshei Torah. That's the major part of Midrashim. And then at the 6th century, we have Midrash Tanchuma. At the 8th century, we have Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, but we don't call them Midrashe Chazal anymore. The Midrashe Chazal are, Midrash Tanchuma it's the 6th century. That's why we do push it into the compilement of Chazal, okay? So it's different people in different times for about let's reduce it to 500 years, okay? Of 500 years, different circumstances in the area of Eretz Israel and in Bavel. And these are the Midrashim, okay? What we know today, and I'll stop here, Rachel, because I'll do that introduction later, okay, in the course. There's a special sources for that, okay? But I wanted to say, in terms of what the Rambam is saying, the Rambam is not the first one to approach Midrashim and to say, hey, think twice about them. Before him were Geonei Bavel. And what Geonei Bavel are writing about the Midrash. Now, Geonei Bavel lived closer to Chazal than Rambam. Rambam is the 12th century, the end of the 12th century. Geonim are from the 8th century to the 10th century. The Gemara was compiled sometime during the 6th century. So they are very close, like they're 200 years after the Gemara, after the Talmud Bavli and Talmud Yerushalmi. And they are saying very harsh things. They are saying no one should read the part of Agada in Chazal. They said it in order to catch the people's attention. It was, they're playing with words. The main thing to learn from Chachamim is the halachic part of the Gemara. And when they get questions asking them about Midrashim, do we need to believe in certain Midrashim? And they say, absolutely not. Okay? So why is it important to say that? Because what happens during Jewish history, from taking Midrashim as a nice written way of entertaining people or laying down ideas that everyone know they don't think literally that this is what happened. And Geonim are saying, yes, it's not true, it's not real, it's not telling us history. I'll give you examples in a minute. Then the Rambam is saying 3 different groups. What happened at the modern age, especially, let's say starting from the 16th century, the distance, what happened in Jewish history, not only did we distance ourselves from those ideas, but people started taking the Midrashim literally. And if you say something against the understanding of the Midrash, then you're saying something against Jewish belief. So it's something very interesting that happened, but it also in line with halachic sources. Because what we find after the 16th century is 2 things. One, Kabbalah, and the second thing, everyone's focusing on halacha. There are hardly any parshanei mikra between the 16th century and the 18th century. And it's interesting as of itself, but we're not learning history right now. And only during the 19th century do we start to learn Midrashim, and people go back to the symbol, to the idea, to the message, to the metaphor, and try to mamash find codes in Chazal for certain ideas and see them in the vast group, in the vast material of Midrashim. Now, the last one to follow the words of Rambam is the Maharal of Prague. The Maharal lived at the beginning of the 16th century. The Maharal mi Prague at the beginning of the 17th century, in the middle of the 17th century. I don't remember right now if someone can check the exact days, I'll thank you. But the Maharal is the last one to take the words of the Rambam and to write books about it. In other words, he takes Midrashei Chazal and he opens them and he's trying to give us the message. And I'll give you 2 examples, okay? One example is a very famous example that we all know, that Rivka was 3 years old when she helped Eliezer and his camels. And this is what we've been taught in kindergarten and in school, and it became like a thing. Okay, so Rivka was 3 years old. It's a Midrash. And the first one to say, listen, we don't have to believe that Midrash, is Rabbi Avraham ibn Ezra. And the Ibn Ezra in his commentary is saying, it doesn't make sense that she was 3 years old. How can a 3 years old, go back and forth from the fountain and bringing buckets of water to help Eliezer and his camels? So this is an example for the Rambam was saying, if it doesn't make sense logically, you don't have to accept it as true. So what do I do with the Midrash saying that she was 3 years old? Okay, this is a question. We can definitely say that maybe there was an oral tradition saying that she was very young. But it's not halakha that I need to accept it. In other words, if it doesn't make sense, we don't have to accept it as true. And Ibn Ezra is saying, maybe she was 12, maybe she was 13, maybe she was 14, a teenager, but not a small child, not a young child. Now, for the Rambam, whoever believed this midrash to be literate is to make fun of Chazal or to belittle them. But some people would say, no, wait, listen, women, children got married when they were very, very young. So maybe the development of the children was different. So that's another way of like, okay, do we believe that? Do we believe that the development of people was different? So maybe before the flood, because people lived, for so many years. But after, when we're talking about the days of Abraham, does it really make sense? So I bring you the Ibn Ezra, but just to tell you that it's okay not to feel okay with things that don't make sense to us. Because through history, there are people who were brave enough to stand up and to say, okay, listen, this is one opinion in the Midrash. What I will want to show you during this year through the different figures, that Chazal themselves, didn't believe everything they said, but they said it for a reason. But also there were lots of contradictions in understanding ideas in the Torah through Midrash in the same generation. And the same Rav could contradict, can say on things something else, someone else said. Let's say someone from Yavne is disagreeing with someone from Keisari who understood something about Dinah. And it's like, no, this is not what happened. Let me tell you what happened. Because when we work with Midrash, we have no obligation to the previous generation or to people in our generation, in Chazal, that are greater than us, are famous than us. And what we find is many different opinions on an idea, on a person, on a story in the Torah with different people, because Midrash, differently than halakha, has to do with beliefs, with ideas, with emunot v'deot, philosophy, theology, morality, psychology, okay? And people are different, okay? It's in a way similar to what we did in Tefillah. Every person has a different way of being in the world, and their tefillah is different, and their understanding of tefillah is different. Same thing with Midrash. Also, because circumstances and history is different, it's not the same thing to live during the time of the Mikdash and after Mered Bar Kochva in understanding what happens to Am Yisrael. And that's why, for example, Shir HaShirim Rabbah, the Midrash of Shir HaShirim, Chazal will say, it's a metaphor, it's for Am Yisrael and God. But a Chacham from the 1st century in Eretz Yisrael is going to say different, who is under the Roman Empire, who is going to understand the story of Am Yisrael differently than a Chacham at the 5th century after the Christian Empire, after the Roman Empire became Christian, because it's different battles, different struggles, different understanding. Okay, so that's what we have in the Midrash, and it's very important to remember that. I'll give you one more example. We all know it. We all know that the Midrash is saying that the, איך אומרים אתון? איך אומרים אתון? Not a donkey. The women, the menekeva of a donkey.
A mule.
A mule. Thank you, Daniela. לא משנה. So, ha'aton shel Bil'am. And the Midrash is saying, ha'aton shel Bil'am is the donkey that Avraham rode to Akedat Yitzchak. And it's the same donkey that Mashiach is going to ride, coming to declare Geulah Bezrat Hashem. Okay? So is it literally? Is there like a stable, urva, a stable? Okay. A stable that is like this donkey changed his sex and is waiting and Rambam is also bringing that example. He says, if you believe that you make Chazal stupid. And the Maharal will bring that same example and he will say, let's try to understand what they said. Obviously, it's not the same animal, but the message is what important. Bil'am is riding an aton. He's riding an animal. What Avraham rode was a chamor. Chamor, says the Maharal, it symbolizes the chomer, the materialistic world. Okay? And if you control the materialistic desires, and you understand that in this world there's more than just the gashmi, the chomri, but there's also the ruchani, and to believe in God, then you're like Avraham Avinu, and then that's why he was able to stand in Akedat Yitzchak b'nisayon. And that's the same thing, says the Maharal, on Mashiach. Mashiach will come riding a donkey. It's a metaphor to say we're entering a different era, where materialistic existence is not going to matter that much, but more the spiritual existence, etc., etc. Okay, so that's just some ideas before we move on.
Yafit.
And I also want Ken, bevakasha.
I just wanted to share something that I always remember. I went to a Haredi school till 8th grade, and we had a teacher who taught us the Midrash that the pigs are trying to fool people by showing the split hooves and pretending that they're kosher. And I have a friend who since then has gone into animal behavior, and she was very upset by this and was arguing with the teacher back and forth. Pigs don't try to fool us. It doesn't make any sense. And the teacher just kept going on and on. No, the Midrash says it, so it's true. And I remember it had such a big impact on me at the time that, that they really felt like it had to be true. If it says it in the Midrash, then the pigs are out to get us, and they're trying to fool us.
Ken. And in the line of what you said, Daniela, when I learned in Matan with Dr. Mordechai Sabato, one of the most genius people I've learned Tanakh with. And Rav Sabato said he's the youngest son of Rav Chaim Sabato of Ma'ale Adumim. And what Dr. Mordechai said, I always call him a Rav. Like he always refused to be called a Rav. He always, no, Doctor, no Rav. Okay, he's very modest. So he said that he thinks and I saw that Miri started something about teaching method, to write something that is meant to be understood as not real, not declared. Okay, אני אתייחס לזה, מירי, בסדר? But Rav Sabato was saying that he used to read his kids before they go to bed a chapter of Tanakh, and with his son they got to Eliyahu Behar HaKarmel, and he's reading the Behar HaKarmel, and his son says, "But Abba, when are the talking oxes are coming? When Shvarim HaMedabrim? When you missed that? I didn't hear you read about the Shvarim HaMedabrim." And he realized, and what Mordechai was saying, as Dr. Sabato was saying, like that they learned the story, they learned the Midrash in school, and they did not know it's not written in the text. So he said his recommendation to especially kindergarten, when they talk about Parashat HaShavua, so he said you should have a chair for Pshat, and you should have a chair for Midrash, and the teacher can just jump and say, like, this is what's it. I don't know if it can happen, in confusing little kids, but we all grow up with, one story in our head combining everything. For me, that happened with Avraham and jumping into Kivshan Ha'esh. The first time, and Kita Aleph, Lamadnu Avraham, is like, we learned that story, and then we start reading Torah, and like, רגע, איפה הכבשן? איפה הוא קופץ? So it is very important. The separation is important, but maybe it needs to get to be in a later age. I don't know in terms of that. But Miri, for what you were saying, I strongly believe that when Chazal were saying those things, everyone knew what it meant, and they trusted people to understand. But we lost that throughout the ages, like what happened to us in many things. Getting close into Arba Amot shel Halacha, not writing any. And it's especially true for the Ashkenazic world, but not writing poem, piyutim and midrashim chadashim and Pershanut Mikra, etc. But thank God, I really do think that we today live in a time where we have the tools, we have the learning of the history, we have so much that can help us understand Midrash Chazal, and I really feel that our generation for the last, I don't know, maybe 70 years is bringing back the glory of the Midrash, and through that also the glory of Chazal, because Midrash is such a smart piece of literature. I really think it's the most complex, beautiful, smart, and deep Jewish writings throughout history. It's just so rich in so many ways. And I think we like since the beginning of learning, of using science into learning philological and historical and archaeological in Jewish texts, we understand the depth and the geniosity of Midrashei Chazal. Okay, so let me share one more thing and we'll move on. I just wanted to show you one of the early scholars of Midrash was Halevi, Professor Halevi, Zichrono Livracha, in the middle of the 20th century, and he said the following: the Agadah, the Midrash that is written about a biblical text, has three interests. Okay, when we read a Midrash that is written upon a biblical verse or story, they have three interests. One is the aesthetic interest. What's an aesthetic interest? The picture, the verse, the picture, the story in the Torah, in the Tanakh, is very short, and the Midrash comes and make it into a bigger, wider, richer picture. Okay, so that's the aesthetic interest. The other interest is the exegetical parshani. Okay. In other words, there are few things in the text that are not very clear, or is it difficult words or contradictions, or something is not full understanding. And then Chazal are coming and explain the entire thing fully. And the last interest is the educational interest, or the actual one. In other words, Chazal are living in a certain time, and they can use story from the Torah to say something actual, educational, a message to their generation, to their time, and with that they help the people go through a certain time. So that's Halevi in his book Sharei Agadah. Maybe this is what someone who you know more is Professor Yonah Frenkel, Gam Zichrono Livracha. He was in the Hebrew. He was the teacher of Professor Avigdor Shin'an, who is one of the greatest Agadah teachers of our generation. And Yonah Frenkel, in his book Darkei Agadah veMidrash, is saying that in the verse there's some difficulty that the darshan wants to explain, or the darshan wants to say something, but it's not in the text, but he's using the text as a vehicle to say what he wants to say, or he wants to say something new that doesn't appear in the text, but he's using the text to bring his new idea, because then everyone will be able to hear it or will accept it. And the fourth thing is like he's telling a story. In other words, he wants people to remember something in the biblical text, which is very dull in words, And the darshan is giving an entire story that brings the thing alive, and it makes it easier for people to remember. Okay, so let's move to the second page I've sent you. Okay. So I'm sorry, this is all in Hebrew, but let me just maybe see, are there any questions that you can ask? If you can, I can wait to the end, or if you want to ask something up till now, you can just, open your mute and ask me. There are few places in Chazal that regard the Midrash, and one of my favorite quotes from the Sifrei is Midrash Halacha. In other words, it's in the time of the Mishnah, and it's really beautiful, and it says, you want to get to know God? You want to get to know who created the world? Learn Agada. From the Agada, you get to know who created the world. And I love this quote because it tells me that the Chachamim during the time of the Mishnah, they understand that learning only Halakha is not going to embark love to God or to get to know God. In other words, to learn Halakha is to learn what we need to do as people in this world. But to learn Midrash is to get to know the ways of God, is to get to have an understanding in the way that God runs the world, or the way that we want to understand how to be in the world, not connect to halakha. Because not everything in halakha is the way that people need to conduct themselves morally, socially, even physically, how to be a parent, how to be a spouse, how to regard non-Jews. All these topics are in the Agadah. And it's such an amazing sentence telling us that to be Oved Hashem, or to be a God, to believe it, to be a faithfulness person, we have to learn Agadah. It gives us a wider, richer, broader picture of God. The second quote is actually from Bialik, the poet, הסופר העברי הראשון, but the Israeli poet from the beginning of the 20th century. And Bialik, who I'm sure most of you know, that he grew up in a very frum community as a child. And when he was a teenager, as many in his generation, during the Enlightenment, the light of the university and science and all the discoveries caught their mind, and they left yeshiva. And he also left the yeshiva, and he became non-religious, but he was very, very, very educated. He knew Torah, Mishnah, Gemara, Midrashim. He wrote Sefer HaAgadah together with a friend, and they took they took all the midrashim that they knew, and they wrote them in a simple language so everyone can have it in their homes. And for years, it was a very popular Jewish book in the house of Chiloni people. Also in religion, we also had Sefer HaAgadah in my house. Like, it was really nice to read it. So Bialik is saying, Lahalacha panim zoafot. Halacha has a frowning face. Agada has laughing face. Halacha is very strict, steady, strong as iron. It's midat hadin. And Agada is Mekila. I don't have all the words for that in English, but Agada is very soft, is very easygoing. It's nice to hear. It's midat harachamim. Halacha has something very strict, which has to do with the obligation of we are enslaving ourselves to halacha. This is an obligation that we have to do. And Haggadah is constantly renewing itself. It's the freedom of human thinking. It's the permission to use all of our aspects, mind, emotion, creativity. So, and I also think it's beautiful, even though I have some friends that love learning halacha and they get a lot of joy from learning halacha. I, personally, I it's not my cup of tea to learn halacha. I mean, it's. Do you hear the noise that come from my? No, okay, good. Thank you. But this is exactly what I love about Midrash. It's the freedom of human spirit to try to understand the world, to try to understand human beings, to try to understand why human beings are acting in a certain way, and also the way of Chazal to tell us, how to be in the world beside of what to do as religious people following halakha. Let me see what else. In the Bavli and Chagiga, Chachamim are saying that the Ba'alei Agada, there were sages during the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara that were expert. They were like the most creative people around, and they're the ones who were teaching Agada. And the Gemara is saying that the words of Agada attract people. It's like a thirsty person needing water. The Agada is like water that we drink when we're very, very thirsty. And in terms of the Agada, going everywhere and doesn't have to, two people don't have to believe the same thing or to say the same thing. The Gemara in Sanhedrin as using it on the pasuk, Achat diber Elohim, shtaim zu shamati. Okay, the verse on the Tanakh is one, but we can interpret it in different ways, and in different meanings to one pasuk, and that is kind of the rationale behind the midrashim. Is like, yes, it's okay to do that, because even though God gave us one verse, we can hear different things, we can understand different things in this one pasuk of Chazal. I'm just going to tell you what we have here. I brought to you, one statement from the Geonim, for example, Rav Hai Gaon. And Rav Hai Gaon is saying in regard to Midrash, Hevei yodim ki divrei agada lav keshmu'aim. Divrei agada is not like halacha. Shmu'a is about halacha. Okay, agada is not like halacha. Everyone kol echad doresh ma she'ala al libo. Everyone say whatever they want to say. Everyone say whatever pumps into their mind that moment. That's why we don't have to accept it to be true. We don't have to accept it as halacha that we need to paskin. ונשאל אם יש הפרש בין אגדות שנכתבו בתלמוד שאנו מצווים להסיר שיבושם, לאגדות הכתובות מחוץ לתלמוד. And he also was asked, Rav Hai was asked, do we have to regard the agadot in the Talmud that we need to understand separately from the agadot which is outside the Talmud? In other words, during the time of Geonim, they knew there are two compilement of agadot. There are those who were written in the Talmud, and those who are written outside in Midrashei Rabbah. And what he says is, but Talmud yesh very little agadot, and it says like the midrashic material in the Talmud is very small. And what is not meshubash, is confused, wrong, unclear, unfull. Those kind of agadot in the Talmud, we should never rely on top of them. Okay, if it's not, so if it's mashe meshubash, yesh leasir. In other words, if you find an agada in the Talmud that doesn't make sense, don't rely on it in order to don't believe in it. And those who are totally wrong, you have to fix it. You have to try to understand what's in what's the meaning of it, why was it added to the text. But everything outside of the Talmud, we don't have to learn. And if you learn it, there's nothing in it that you need to accept as a word of God. Okay? So Rav Hai Gaon is making three different separations. He's saying the Midrash the Midrashim in the Talmud, if they're there and they make sense, it's okay that they're there, but they don't, it's not something that I have to take into account in my belief. And what's there, which is wrong, we have to just try to make sense of it. But none of those agadot in the Talmud are material, halachic material, or real material that we need to take in account when we're telling people what to believe in. And everything which is outside of the Talmud, the Midrashei Rabbah, we don't even need to learn them. And if you learn them, you just need to understand that it's nice, it's pretty, it's adding something to our understanding or to our mind, but it's not Torah leMoshe miSinai. And what Rav Shri Gaon is saying, that Midrash ve'Agada umdananinu, in other words, they're very they change from time to time. They change from person to person. They change from, how should I say that? They are relative to a person and to a time, and there's nothing eternal in them. And that's why en somchim al ha'agada ve'en lemedim min ha'agadot. You cannot learn what to do and how to think from Agada, because they are because they're not proportionate, because they belong to a certain time and a certain person, and there's nothing eternal that we can learn from them. If you have an Agada that is helping people believe in God, as beseder, but there's so many of them. He's saying en sof v'tichlal ha'agadot. There's so many of them that, okay, if you have one specific Agada that you like, it's beseder, but don't think it's the words of God. Kuzari is saying something very similar. I'm not gonna read it, but he's saying something similar about trying to understand what Chazal told us. And this is the words of, in source number 6, these are the word of the Maharal, trying to telling us that we need to reveal the message in the words of Chazal, and not take them literally, especially those that contradict our mind, irrational, etc. Okay, so that was a very long introduction, but I think it's very, very important, because when we start Bezrat Hashem next week with our first character, we will see that in different ages, different Chachamim are saying something totally opposite. But I do invite us to think, does the Midrash make sense? And if it does make sense, if it doesn't contradict anything logical, then it's up to you, each and every one of us, it's up to us to decide whether we want to believe it literally, or we want to try to understand the message or the metaphor behind it. Because obviously, and I do want to say that obviously there are many, many ideas and stories that were passed on from generation to generation by heart, Torah shebe'al peh. Also stories about, and the reason why the Torah decided not to write those stories, it's one thing. But if we get a midrash that doesn't contradict logic and real life, maybe it happened. Maybe it's a story that was passed on from generation to generation. There are some scholars that do not accept the reality and the truth in midrash at all. But I personally, there are a few things that I'm happy to think that maybe they did happen if they make sense. And then just, if they add to our connection to the people and to the stories of Midrash, of Mikra, of the Tanakh, so why not think that it might happen? If no one can prove wrong the story in the Midrash, so there's no reason why not to think that it might happen. But this is going to be an indicator, like with the words of the Rambam are important to me to be an indicator whenever we approach a Midrash of Chazal. Did you have more questions that I missed in the chat? Let me see. Aren't many Hasidic Torah Midrash. So the Hasidic Torah, if it's there many of them are based on Midrash, many of them are based on Kabbalah, especially Torah Ta'ari v'gam HaZohar. And they are the first ones to say they are here to give us a message. Okay, what do I learn from that? Did they understand literally what is said in the Midrashim? I guess some of them did. But that's why I said that in the beginning, during the time of Chazal, and then the Geonim, and then the Rambam, there was a clear understanding that not everything is reality or the truth. But when we come to the thought of Hasidim, I think they, especially the big ones, like the one who wrote Perushim al Torah, Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Nachman, Sfat Emet, Maor V'Shemesh, the different ones who wrote Baal Tanya. I think the word truth is, they think about the word truth differently. In other words, there is a truth which is not, this is what happened historically and realistically, but it's a truth about the way that we live our life and the way that we think about Jewish life and God and the way that we need to behave, etc. So, and I'm not an expert on Hasidic thought, so this is the little that I can, but for me, the most important message is that in terms of Midrash, because it's about belief, and it's very personal, like it's okay to decide in myself, like, what do I take, and if I take in certain Midrashim, there is no religious obligation to accept all the Midrashim as is. And that's why I start with the Rambam, because, there's a lot of respect to the Rambam. Okay, if the Rambam said that, okay, so it's beseder. Okay. טוב, בסדר, נעצור כאן. תודה רבה. שבת שלום, בשורות טובות.
תודה.